Benedict, just to drill down a little bit, what are the main areas then of focus for your proposed research agenda to address the problems of these current generation ERP systems? So maybe just drill down a little bit from your previous response. Can you provide a little more details as to what that would look like?
Yeah, for this research which we propose here, we looked on the different layers that you can see in enterprise systems, and you can identify similar layers between many systems since the architecture to some extent is comparable. And depending on the individual system, we see between 3 and 7 different layers. To give
Hmm.
you an idea, we distinguished the user interface layer, meaning how you interact with the system, the business process layer, and the functionality layer that deal with functionality systems offer and their combination to overarching business processes, and the database data model layer, which looks at how to storage data, how to make information persistent over time, and finally the infrastructure layer that basically deals with the question how the system interacts with the underlying infrastructure and is organized in itself.
Benedict, can you share with our listeners how can improving the user interface of ERP systems help address the problems faced by organizations using them? Let's drill into that one a little bit more.
Yeah. Using the example of the interface layer, we see enterprise systems to be used by many users within organizations, depending on their, like how many users they have. And in the beginning, the approach of enterprise system was standardization, which of course is very useful on a process perspective. However, on a user interface perspective, we might have quite different conditions and requirements. So what we pose or require is an adaptability to the individual requirements of the users. Enterprise systems manage resources, of course, but also the users in front of the ERP systems are resources that need to be effective in their work. And so we want that enterprise systems adapt to the individual circumstances, which could be, for example, special user groups, either young and old users or beginners or advanced users that might require different forms of interaction, information, menus, and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Another example is we need much more responsive designs to allow for flexibility. We can use web-based approaches to support users in the individual working circumstances. And what we see here in the market, to give you an example, is that many systems still rely on this rich client architectures, which also pose many infrastructural requirements on the end user's devices, which are not more up to date. New forms of interactions are increasingly becoming important. We see many new available technologies, such, for example, speech recognition, which could be used to navigate and interact with enterprise systems, might allow for much more interactive operations with ERP systems. In that sense, we suggest enterprise systems vendors to use established technologies that exist. For example, speech recognitions for their systems. There are many technologies available that can be used and implemented in systems which you do not need to develop yourself. And by that, you're able to, make users more efficient by using existing technologies and combining them with your individual systems configuration.
So, Benedict, you shared with us earlier in terms of addressing ERP systems problems, the research agenda would include, as you just discussed, user interface. And then you mentioned business process, functionality, database and data model, and infrastructure and adoption. And now, since you just shared a little bit more insight in terms of the user interface, but let me ask you about the business process as well. In what ways can control of the business processes help improve the performance of ERP systems?
For companies, when implementing systems, like that pose new or different processes to them, the main concern is in keeping and maintaining their competitive advantage. And given that ERP systems, like to some extent standardize their work, they have a kind of fear that they lose this. So what we propose at that point is that enterprise systems in the future should allow for reconfigurable business process. So enterprise systems may provide standard processes that are configured to fit, like a large couple of companies. But when we look into that business processes, that they are not hard coded, but we believe that, like the idea of individual functions, what we'll talk about in a minute, or microservices might be combined towards overall business processes. And by that, we want to propose the idea of modeling instead of programming, meaning we are able to, like to model and to reconfigure processes by enabling customers to do it themselves. And by that, we would be able to allow system users to add their specialized procedures, their individual procedures that constitute their competitive advantage to existing standard processes that company vendors provide. And to be honest, on that point, we see that especially for standard processes, enterprise systems are rather inflexible.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point, Benedict, because, the business model itself, so the way that the organization does business versus the ERP functional fit in terms of how it addresses, your way of doing business, through business processes, control or management is a critical piece of ERP systems. And going back to your point that you made on the value and importance of ERP selection, this is another area that needs to be understood is how does in terms of control of the business processes, how flexible is that or is not that? And is it well aligned with your way of doing business? So great point, great insight. Benedict, next, I'd like the third item that you have mentioned in terms of proposed research agenda is the idea of functionality in ERP. So can you elaborate more on the importance of functionality in ERP systems and how it can be improved?
Yes. Jack, let me point out that I believe in the standardization enterprise systems to allow for. However, the standardization within a company is a very, very great thing. However, what we see is that functionality individual clients are using are by far different. So what we propose here is that we propose a kind of feature repository that like little functional nuggets companies can use, or having a repository where you have different forms that they can combine for their individual setup. And especially since we see that future setups of companies' landscapes, not only enterprise systems, are using more specialized systems, for example, for logistics, production control, and things like that. So in that thing, enterprise systems might over and over become a central backbone of all the systems that companies have in their landscape to kind of integration hubs. So they're still controlling the processes, but not all the functionality are used by them directly. And this poses requirements to their possibility to, like to talk to other systems, to provide an interoperable system space and interact with their specialized counterparts. So by that, we see that the question between standardization and specialization also for customers, and I assume this is something you are also faced with when selecting enterprise systems for your clients, still poses a challenge for them. And adding to that, we see that many of the enterprise system vendors are going to, like open up their architectures to become software platforms, meaning that they allow for third-party contributions in their software. So they're offering a kind of extension and add-ons as part of their modular software infrastructure. And by this opening up, they possibly can attract many external power and innovation within their system. And we see this to be the case by small as well as medium and big companies offering enterprise systems. Giving you the example with Microsoft, that offers over 6,200 extensions in their Microsoft App Stores for their Business Central, and similar things we see at SAP. So what I wanted to say is, in order to allow for clients to choose of different functionalities and different features the systems provide, it might be necessary, like to attract these features so that you not only have to develop themselves. And this is something we see to come in future ERP systems more and more.
Yeah. And Benedict, the artificial intelligence is a area that we're very focused on, and it's certainly a significant interest of mine. So we're really trying to understand the impact of AI on future ERP systems. And I won't veer us off here into a rabbit hole, but I think certainly the immediate, short and long term impact on AI on ERP systems is going to be significant. But that might be a conversation for another day. So instead of veering us off course here on such a fascinating topic there, let me ask you about the other area for research. And that is, what role does the database or the data model play in the performance of ERP systems, and how can it be optimized?
Yeah, the data layer is, like one of the things ERP started with. We're looking back on these days where we are very much focused on relational databases, which for long have been the standard in ERP systems, and of course still are today. And coming from the changed business landscape and the possibility to gather more and more diverse data, we also see a lot of new requirements in the processing and also storage of data. And while in the beginning we saw that vendors just increased resources that allowed for faster processing of all the data the systems need to handle, we also saw that this approach does not address, like the structural problems we have with relational databases today. Yeah, we see much more individualized products that need to be handled. We see a lot of less standardized data structure, and we need new approaches to handle this kind of changes and new advancements. And in this regard, we had another research project I'd like to briefly talk about, where we evaluated different existing database technologies for their readiness for future-proof ERP systems. We were looking at how different databases might be combined, like to serve the challenges we see today. Let me give you an example where relational databases is perfect for this transactional logic. We see that, for example, Industry 4.0 and modern production settings, which a lot of time series data or network structures we see in the service industry might not be fulfilled by this relational approach. So what we developed is like a hybrid approach in which multiple database technologies are combined within one systems, like where we would like to combine their advantages to be used in a single ERP infrastructure. And of course, as you mentioned, you're much into AI. You also see the potential and the need for newer models or structures to be saved for enterprise systems to work properly.
Yeah. So, Benedict, tell me more about the infrastructure. How can the infrastructure be improved to address the problems faced by the current generation ERP systems? And what are some of the challenges in doing so?
We see enterprise systems to be, like a little bit of conservative in, like adopting new hardware and infrastructure possibilities. We see modern hardware allows for much more power in processing and also, for example, heavily parallel processing of informations. However, in order for clients to have these advantages, enterprise systems need to be able to utilize the related advantages from this infrastructure for the operation. And to do so, enterprise systems need to adapt their software architectures to do so. For many of our clients, scalability is, for example, upwards and also downwards an important issues many of our clients face. How can we handle high load times, for example, in trade companies and things like that? And to holistically address the problem, enterprise systems vendor need to reflect on newer possibilities these processing technologies allow for, and like adapt their systems accordingly, but not only using more resources, but using them in a better way. And to give you an example, we see that modern systems can be used either via the cloud or be used on premise. Some of the systems are, for example, cloud-only systems you can use in a software as a service solutions. However, we see that many companies require systems to be at least partly be used on site, since they, for example, want to use them for manufacturing control,
Mhm.
which where we need very, very short response times. And so, like vendors need to open up their ideas for a kind of hybrid combination, for example, combining cloud and on-premise solutions to serve their clients in a better way.
Yeah. The manufacturing control piece is huge, and not only that, the manufacturing control, but also the collection of manufacturing data at some organizations can be quite substantial. But I think there's some very legitimate reasons that we do need, I would say, improved concepts at least, or improved infrastructure that allows for better hybrid solutions. But great point. And so, Benedict, let's just talk a little bit more about the other component of suggested research that you hit on, and that was the idea of adaption. And so, how important is adaption in the context of ERP systems? And how can organizations be encouraged to adapt new technologies and approaches?
When you have a look at our piece of research, what you see is that this kind of adaptation layer, which we refer to as a kind of a more abstract concept, meaning that all of the layers and aspects we talked about earlier need to be adaptable to the individual circumstances of a company and to evolve over time. And to hit for a specific example, we saw that we see much more specialized systems that need to be integrated in the overall landscape. So systems need to be adaptable to the individual configuration clients use. On the other hand, also within the enterprise systems, we see that adaptation on the business process level, for example, reconfigure a business process, changing functional microservices and things like that, need to be possible for clients. So what we want to have is that systems could easily be configured to the individual customer's circumstances and to allow for easy and smooth procedure.